On July 19, 1980, millions of Soviet citizens watched through tears as the Olympic bear Misha floated into the sky. For them, it was a moment of national pride. The USSR was hosting the Olympic Games for the first time and showed the world a grand celebration of sport. But behind this triumph lay a different reality. More than 60 countries boycotted the Games due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Instead of the expected 140 nations, only 81 arrived. The Olympics cost the USSR $3 billion. The budget grew 4 times from the initial plan. A quarter of the expenses were covered through lotteries. Moscow was transformed into a showcase of socialism, but at what price? In this video, we'll tell the full truth about the 1980 Olympics, from the golden era of Soviet sport to the political catastrophe that split the Olympic movement for a decade. A story of triumph that became a tragedy. The 1960s and 1970s belonged to Soviet sports. The USSR dominated the international arena, turning every athletic victory into proof that socialism worked. Each gold medal wasn't just a win, it was a propaganda weapon in the Cold War. Soviet athletes became ambassadors of ideology, living proof that the system bred champions. But victory came at a cost. The golden era began at the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck. Ludmila Belousova and Oleg Protopopov captured gold in pairs skating, mesmerizing the world with their grace. This was just the beginning. From 1964 to 2006, Soviet and Russian pairs won gold at every single Olympics. 42 years of unbroken dominance. But the true legend was Irina Rodnina. 3 Olympic golds, 1972, 1976, 1980. 10 world championships, 11 European titles. Throughout her entire career, she never lost a major international competition. Not once. An absolute record that still stands today. Her path was brutal. 8-hour training days, 6 days a week, no exceptions. Then in 1972, disaster struck. Her partner Alexei Ulanov married another figure skater right before the Olympics. Rodnina had to compete alongside him anyway. They won gold. A year later, she started over with Alexander Zaitsev and climbed back to the top. In Soviet sports, failure meant more than losing. It meant career collapse and public humiliation. They called the Soviet team the Red Machine, and for good reason. Combination plays that left opponents dizzy. Speed that seemed impossible. Technical mastery the hockey world had never seen. Even Canadians, who practically invented the game, admitted defeat. The Soviets had surpassed them. The face of this era was goaltender Vladislav Tretiak. In 1972, at just 20 years old, he stepped onto the ice for the Summit Series against Canada, one of the most intense sporting battles of the Cold War. Game 1 in Montreal. The Canadians jumped ahead 4-1. Victory seemed certain. Then the Soviets struck back. Final score, 7-3. Tretiak stopped 38 of 41 shots, leaving Canadian forwards stunned. After the game, Phil Esposito said, "We thought we would crush them, but that Russian goalie was incredible." The USSR won the series 4-3-1, shocking the hockey world. But behind the glory lay a darker truth. Players lived in barracks for months, torn from their families. The system showed no mercy. Miss your performance targets, and you were gone. CSKA, the army club, essentially owned its players. In 1976, Tretiak carried the Soviet flag at the Innsbruck Olympics. The USSR won gold again. In chess, Soviet dominance was absolute. From Botvinnik to Karpov, Moscow's grandmasters owned the world title for decades. The Soviet chess school reigned supreme, and playing chess became part of the state's intellectual development program, but the system was ruthless. In 1976, Grandmaster Viktor Korchnoi defected during a tournament in Amsterdam. Within days, authorities erased his name from every Soviet chess textbook. His wife and son? Trapped in the USSR for years. Lose to a Western opponent? Kiss your international travel goodbye. The successes extended beyond these three sports: weightlifting, gymnastics, wrestling, track and field. Soviet athletes hauled home dozens of medals from every international competition. Sports became Moscow's most powerful weapon of soft power, proof that socialism produced winners. It was riding this wave of triumph that the USSR earned the right to host the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow. This would be the crowning achievement, the ultimate propaganda spectacle of the decade. But political events half a world away were about to turn everything upside down. On October 21, 1974, history was made in Vienna. The International Olympic Committee announced that the 1980 Summer Olympics would be held in Moscow. The USSR beat Los Angeles 39 votes to 20. It was a diplomatic triumph and recognition of superpower status. For Soviet leadership, the 1980 Olympics weren't just another sporting event. This was their chance to showcase developed socialism to the world, to prove their system worked. Moscow would become the perfect city. Every street, every building, a testament to Soviet superiority. The initial budget for sports facilities, 356.5 million rubles. It seemed reasonable at the time. Work began immediately. The capital faced massive reconstruction. The crown jewel, the Olympiyskiy Sports Complex, Europe's largest indoor stadium seating 35,000. Construction started in 1977, crews working around the clock in 3 shifts, a velodrome in Krylatskoye, a rowing canal, tennis courts, swimming pools. Moscow sprouted modern sports facilities seemingly overnight. They built an Olympic village for athletes that would later house regular citizens. Luzhniki and Dynamo stadiums got complete makeovers. Building facades along major streets received fresh coats of paint. Workers flooded in from across the Union, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Ukraine. Tens of thousands lived in makeshift barracks on Moscow's outskirts, putting in 12 to 14-hour days. Miss a deadline, you could kiss your career goodbye. By 1979, the writing was on the wall. They were behind schedule and hemorrhaging money. The games spread beyond the capital. Tallinn would host sailing. They built an entire yacht center from scratch. Then disaster struck. Engineers discovered the structures couldn't handle the load. Everything needed rebuilding, millions more rubles, and time was running out. Leningrad got football matches. Kyiv and Minsk became Olympic venues too. It showcased Soviet scale and ambition, but each city demanded more infrastructure spending. Artist Viktor Chizikov created Misha, a cuddly bear cub sporting an Olympic belt. When they unveiled him, Soviet hearts melted instantly. He became the most beloved Olympic mascot in history. They prepared Moscow with obsessive attention to detail. Fresh paint on facades, repaved roads, flower beds everywhere. But behind the beautification, a darker operation unfolded. The city was being cleansed. Spring 1980 brought mass police sweeps. They forcibly removed the homeless, alcoholics, and Roma from Moscow. Dissidents disappeared into exile or psychiatric wards. In January 1980, they exiled human rights activist Andrei Sakharov to Gorky, now Nizhny Novgorod. without trial. A closed city where the inconvenient dissident couldn't embarrass them during the Olympics. Stores prepared for the foreign invasion. Suddenly, scarce goods appeared. Imported clothes, electronics, sausage, caviar, chocolate. In July 1980, Moscow became a Potemkin village of plenty, shelves overflowing with everything. But ordinary Muscovites couldn't shop there. You needed special passes to get in. Yet despite everything, ordinary Soviet people embraced the Olympics with genuine enthusiasm. This was once in a lifetime. Over 300,000 volunteers signed up to help. They studied English, prepared to welcome the world, convinced they were part of something historic. State propaganda ran at full throttle. Daily updates flooded newspapers, radio, television. This would be the greatest Olympics ever staged, proof of Soviet strength to the entire world. But while Moscow prepared for glory, events half a world away were unfolding that would shatter every plan. On December 25, 1979, Soviet troops rolled into Afghanistan. The Olympic dream was about to become a nightmare. When Moscow won the right to host the Olympics in 1974, Soviet leadership was confident this would be profitable. The initial budget of 356.5 million rubles seemed reasonable. By 1980, that figure would become a financial nightmare. By 1977, costs had exploded to 906.6 million rubles, 2.5 times over budget. Then spring 1979 brought disaster. Inspections revealed critical flaws in project designs. The buildings weren't safe. Structures couldn't handle the load. In March 1979, the construction director at Krylatskoye Velodrome got an ultimatum: finish by October, or lose your job and your party card. He drove his workers relentlessly. No days off. They delivered early. 6 months later, the truth came out. The rush job violated concrete pouring standards. Everything needed rebuilding, millions more down the drain. By late 1979, costs hit 457.9 million rubles, 4 times the original plan. Official Soviet figures claimed $2 billion. Independent experts said $3 billion. When it became clear the state budget couldn't handle it, authorities got creative. In 1976, they launched mass lotteries, Sport Lotto and Sprint. Buy a ticket, help the Olympics. Soviet citizens bought tickets by the millions. One draw, 7.5 to 10 million tickets sold. People thought they were supporting something great. In reality, they were plugging budget gaps that grew faster than the stadiums. Vladimir Sokolov, an engineer from Leningrad, hit the jackpot in 1978. 10,000 rubles, 3 years' salary. He bought a Jiguli and drove to Moscow to see the Olympic construction sites. What he saw shocked him. Kilometer-long convoys of trucks, thousands of workers laboring in 3 shifts, makeshift barracks lining the ring road. I understood where the lottery money was going, he recalled later. You'd need 10 jackpots like mine to make a dent. Lotteries bankrolled over a quarter of the entire Olympics '80 budget. The socialist economy was running its biggest sporting event on gambling winnings. The Olympics devoured the country's resources. 10% of Moscow's annual budget went to the games. Scarce construction materials, cement, steel, glass, got shipped to the capital first. In Sverdlovsk, residential construction ground to a halt. All cement diverted to Moscow. In Minsk, they postponed hospital renovations for the same reason. This happened while the Soviet economy was already sputtering. Oil prices were falling. Spending on Afghanistan was rising. They transformed Moscow into a showcase of prosperity, while people in Voronezh, Kazan, and Irkutsk queued for bread. Official revenues, 760 million rubles. Expenses, 862 million. Loss, 102 million rubles. And that didn't count the hidden costs. For comparison, Montreal spent 30 years paying off Olympic debts. Los Angeles in 1984 ran the first profitable games. Moscow hemorrhaged billions on an event meant to prove socialist superiority. The 1980 Olympics exposed the fatal flaw of planned economy. No brakes on prestige projects. When the party declared something a priority, budgets didn't matter. The result? Massive propaganda spending while the country spiraled toward economic crisis. But the financial catastrophe was only half the story. While Moscow burned through billions on stadiums, events half a world away were unfolding that would turn triumph into international humiliation. When Soviet troops crossed into Afghanistan on December 25, 1979, the official explanation was limited assistance to a friendly government. But the reality was a war that would drag on for 10 years and become the Soviet Union's Vietnam. The first casualty, however, was the Olympic dream that Moscow had spent years cultivating. President Jimmy Carter announced on January 20, 1980, that the United States would boycott the Moscow Olympics unless Soviet forces withdrew from Afghanistan by February 20th. His decision combined genuine outrage over the invasion with domestic political calculation. With presidential elections approaching and his approval ratings sagging under the Iran hostage crisis, the boycott offered a way to appear resolute. The move wasn't merely cynical. Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov had publicly called for the boycott, lending it moral weight. When Moscow ignored the February 20th deadline, Carter began pressuring NATO allies to join. Though not all governments succeeded in keeping their athletes home, the final tally surprised even pessimists. 65 countries refused to send teams to Moscow. Canada, Japan, West Germany, and Norway joined the boycott, as did China, which remained hostile to Moscow after their ideological split in the 1960s. Some nations found middle ground, allowing athletes to compete under the Olympic flag rather than their national colors. The boycott proved incomplete. Despite Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's forceful advocacy, the British Olympic Association voted to send a team anyway. Australia and New Zealand dispatched smaller delegations over their government's objections, while France participated fully. Instead of the anticipated 140 nations, only 81 arrived in Moscow, the largest Olympic boycott in history. Many competitions lost their meaning without the world's top athletes, and the games that were meant to showcase Soviet openness instead underscored the country's growing isolation. American athletes bore the heaviest emotional burden. Tracy Calkins, a 16-year-old swimmer favored to win 3 gold medals, had trained 6 hours daily since age 8. When the U.S. Olympic Committee voted 1,634 to 797 on April 12, 1980, to support the boycott, her childhood dream evaporated. Years later, she reflected, "I had been working toward that goal since I was 8 years old." Though she eventually captured 3 golds at the 1984 Los Angeles Games, she was past her peak. Her story repeated itself across the American team. Sprinters, wrestlers, and rowers who had devoted years to a single moment saw politics intervene. Soviet athletes experienced their own disappointment, winning medals in competitions where their strongest rivals never appeared. The victories felt diminished. Soviet propaganda framed the Western boycott as an admission of weakness, but party leaders recognized the setback. The games had cost billions and were intended to project Soviet strength and openness. Instead, They revealed isolation at a moment when the country's economic and political strains were deepening. The damage extended beyond 1980. 4 years later, when Los Angeles hosted the Olympics, the Soviet Union organized a retaliatory Eastern Bloc boycott. For 8 years, the Olympic movement fractured, with successive games missing roughly half the world's best athletes. Only in 1988, when Seoul hosted the Games, did most nations return. On July 19, 1980, as Misha the bear floated skyward and Soviet spectators wept, the Moscow Games closed with ceremony. Records were set, medals awarded, and moments celebrated. But historians now view the 1980 Olympics less as a showcase of Soviet achievement than as a marker of the country's trajectory. Isolated, rigid, and approaching systemic crisis. When Misha the bear floated into the Moscow sky on August 3, 1980, the Soviet Union was left with more than memories. The Olympics left behind concrete structures, social scars, and a complicated legacy that would outlive the country itself. In the months before the Games, Moscow underwent what officials called preparation. Authorities systematically removed anyone deemed undesirable from the city center. Known dissidents were arrested or relocated. Homeless people, alcoholics, and petty criminals disappeared into holding facilities outside Moscow. People with visible disabilities were encouraged to leave during the Games. For the Olympics' duration, Moscow became unrecognizable. Stores that had been chronically empty suddenly overflowed with goods. Meat appeared in butcher shops. Fresh produce filled markets. Western journalists marveled at the abundance, unaware they were witnessing a temporary facade. Meanwhile, ordinary Muscovites faced restricted access to their own city. Central areas required special passes. The artificial prosperity vanished when foreign guests departed. Within days, stores returned to their familiar shortages. Supplies had been diverted from other regions, creating deprivation that lasted months. The physical legacy endured longer. The Soviet Union invested approximately 9 billion rubles in Olympic facilities, a staggering sum representing years of economic output. Much of this investment outlasted the country that built it. The Olympic Village became apartment buildings, housing Muscovites for decades. Sheremetyevo Airport received major expansion. New metro stations opened, roads were paved, telecommunications upgraded. Luzhniki Stadium remained Russia's premier sporting venue into the 21st century. Swimming pools and arenas continued hosting competitions long after the Soviet Union dissolved. Yet this came at tremendous cost. The 9 billion rubles could have built housing, modernized factories, or improved healthcare. Economists later estimated the Olympics contributed to Soviet economic strain, diverting resources from pressing needs. For those who lived through it, the 1980 Olympics occupy an uncomfortable place in memory. Soviet citizens who attended often recall genuine pride. The ceremony's grandeur, organizational efficiency, athletic success created authentic moments of national accomplishment. Many Muscovites remember fondly when their city was clean, stores full, and global attention focused on them. Moscow briefly felt like the center of culture rather than an isolated capital. Yet this nostalgia coexists with awareness of political reality. Even then, educated Soviets understood the boycott as humiliating rebuke. Watching events without American competitors felt hollow. The 1980 Olympics marked a turning point. The Games were meant to showcase a confident superpower. Instead, they revealed a country increasingly isolated, spending resources it couldn't afford, while its economic foundation crumbled. Today, Russians see both triumph and tragedy. Sporting achievements were real. Infrastructure genuinely benefited cities. Organizational success demonstrated Soviet capabilities. But the Games also represent massive squandering on a project that failed its purpose, proving Soviet legitimacy to the world. The boycott turned celebration into defensive exercise. Temporary prosperity exposed economic weakness. Social cleansing revealed state callousness. The 1980 Moscow Olympics succeeded as sporting event, failed as political theater. This duality captures the late Soviet period itself, a system that could still accomplish impressive projects, but no longer convince anyone it represented the future. When Misha floated away, spectators wept. Some wept from genuine emotion, while others sensed something ending beyond the Games. The Olympics had become what the Soviet system itself was becoming, a grand spectacle masking fundamental decay.